In Path of Exile 2, ailments can be pretty lethal. I've died to being frozen many times, but the logic which determines when an ailment gets applied isn't always super straightforward. So in this video, we're going to go through some of those systems which determine when you have an ailment inflicted on you, and we're also going to go through some tweaks you can make to your build to help prevent an ailment getting applied, or at least mitigate them when they do end up being inflicted. Let's jump in. So we'll start with this. This will kind of be our framework for talking about damage here. For the most part, an attack comes in, you can dodge it or evade it, then block it, then damage gets applied once it goes through your resistance, and then the damage that, isn't mitigated there hits your energy shield or life pool. Ailments don't follow the exact same path. Instead, ailments are essentially calculated off any attack that hits. Something that hits is generally between this dodge evade step and the block step. So if you're running a block-based build and you're blocking lots of attacks, those attacks are technically still hitting you and contributing to ailment buildup. Let's talk a little bit more about that. Ailment attacks actually kind of branch off here, and they're more concerned with this system called threshold. So how threshold works is it's kind of a whole different resistance system that only applies to ailment damage, and this is what ailments are going to be calculated against. Let's start with an example. We'll start with shock. So let's say we have like a shock attack coming in, and it is, hit our character, we haven't dodged or evaded it, and we're about to take shock damage. What's going to happen is the shock damage is going to do some math against our ailment threshold. What is an ailment threshold? Ailment threshold is actually a system which is based on your life total. So if you're running a build with super low life, you may have noticed that you seem to be getting ailments quite a bit. That's because this calculation is all based on your life total. Your resistances don't apply, none of that matters. This is all a calculation based on your total life. For these examples, let's just say that we have 100 total life, just so we can make the math easy. And back to our example, we're getting hit with a shock attack here. So let's say we're getting hit with the shock attack that's doing 100 lightning damage to us. So this lightning attack will hit us, the 100 damage will be applied to our character. If we have any resistance or anything like that, it will be applied. So say we had 40% lightning resistance, this 100 lightning damage would be reduced to 60 damage, and that would go to our energy shield or life pool. But while that's happening, we're going to have stuff going on to determine if we are hit with the shock ailment in tandem. How ailment threshold actually works is there is a 25% chance for the ailment to be applied per 100% of your life which the attack is doing. So let's say there's an attack doing exactly 100 damage to us. That means that we have a 25% chance for this ailment to be afflicted. I should add a note here that this is only for shock and ignite damage. Frost damage works a little bit differently, but I'll address that when we get to it. So for shock and ignite, if we're getting hit for 100 damage, that means we have a 25% chance for it to apply this, shock ailment to us. Let's then say we're getting hit, just as an example, the raw hit damage. Again, this isn't like a hit that's going to necessarily do 200 damage to us, because this hit will go through our resistances and all the other damage mitigation steps we have. But to determine if shock is applied, we look at the raw damage that's being dealt. So let's say 200 raw damage is being dealt. Because we have 100 total life, now this thing has a 50% chance to inflict its shock ailment on us. That's the system that you've got to kind of understand, and that's why, again, low life characters are more prone to getting ailments, because their life total is the thing that's dictating how much damage an attack has to do for that ailment to be inflicted. So let's say this hits. What ends up happening? Shock is a pretty straightforward ailment. It just gives you plus 20% to damage, incoming damage taken. So not the worst of them that can be applied, but as I said, this same exact math applies to ignite. So let's talk about ignite next. So let's say we get hit with a fire attack, and we'll also say it's just doing 100 damage again to make the math easy. We've got 100 total life. This attack is doing 100 fire damage to us. Its chance to ignite is 25%, just like we had with shock. But when we are ignited, something different happens if that 25% chance gets hit. So instead of just some random debuff being applied plus 20% damage, we then have where our character is ignited, and we get 20% of the raw damage before mitigation that fire attack was going to do is then applied to our character as a dot. This damage is applied over 4 seconds, but note here I've drawn this arrow down into our resistances because the 20% fire damage that is being dealt to us by Ignite, this thing is actually mitigated by our resistance layer. So if we have a bunch of fire resistance, it'll actually help us deal with this damage. So again, this is kind of confusing because the math that we're doing to determine if we are ignited is pre-resistance, but the damage that actually ends up being dealt to us goes through our resistance layer to determine how much it hurts us. And then because it's fire damage, it goes to our energy shield and then maybe eventually our life pool if our energy shield gets burnt down. Alright, I want to talk about freeze now, and we don't have quite as many details on freeze as I would like, but I'm going to do my best to explain it based on what we know right now. So freeze doesn't seem to follow this same kind of random roll against your ailment threshold for every attack. Instead, there seems to be a build-up meter with freeze that I assume is reset about every 3.3 seconds, same as the stun build-up. How freeze works is every attack that hits you with cold damage will kind of contribute to this freeze meter. It seems to be the case that as your elemental ailment threshold goes up, the same thing that's contributing to your fire and lightning resistance for ignite and shock, it will also make it so you are a little bit more resilient to freeze in the same way. When you do end up getting frozen, what's going to happen is your character will have its action speed set to 0. You really can't do anything when that happens. You can't like cast spells or move. You can use potions still, but that's about it. So action speed is 0 when you are frozen. So note here that again, your cold resist doesn't actually help you from being frozen, because this damage is the unmitigated damage that's used to calculate if you get frozen or not. Again, towards the end of the video, we'll talk about some steps you can take to make this not quite as lethal when it does end up happening. Okay, poison. Poison is a little bit simpler. Poison ends up doing damage to you. It can be mitigated by resistance, similar to Ignite, but poison damage is also a 20% dot over time, just like fire damage is. It only lasts 2 seconds instead of fire damage is 4. Attacks which have a chance to poison, again, it's just a flat percentage, so like an attack could say 12% chance to poison, and you know, there's a chance that then if you do not dodge or evade it, it will poison you. These attacks that hit, they are basing and scaling off of either physical or chaos damage, and the damage that poison's going to do is just the chaos damage. So remember that once poison hits you and it's inflicted, this damage is going to go from your resistances and be applied to your character's life pool directly, bypassing your energy shield. Chill, the chill ailment, is also kind of another special edge case here, so we'll call this chill. So how chill works is it is based on just a kind of chill minimum threshold that needs to be hit. So this chill damage needs to be greater than some amount in order for the chill to hit you. We don't know exactly what that is, but the impact of chill is not nearly as severe as most of these other things. So what chill is going to do is it's also going to impact your action speed. It can be anywhere from 20 to 50%, I believe. 20% is the minimum. It may be able to go lower, but what it'll do is it'll essentially slow you down and make it so your character's actions are also slowed by this magnitude. The thing that affects how much chill you take on, like how impactful that is how much the chill which hits you, the cold attack, how potent that attack is. So the more powerful an attack hits you that's a cold attack, it'll just kind of give you another action speed debuff that's like something like 20% to 50% reduced action speed, and that will last for 2 seconds when you're chilled, is the default unless something specifies otherwise. Something to note here, like the ground effects, the ice areas on the map, those are like a 20% chill. That'll slow you down a little bit, reduce your actions, and you'll stay chilled as long as you stay in those cold areas. While we're on this, we should probably talk a little bit about electrocute. As far as I know, electrocute is very similar to freeze. Again, it's scaling off lightning damage. When you are electrocuted, it also sets your action speed to 0, so it's kind of like a stun. But to be honest, I don't know if I've ever been electrocuted in game. I don't think that there's many enemies that are doing electrocute. I think a skill needs to explicitly call out that it will electrocute, similar to poison. Skills need to say that they will poison or have a percentage chance to poison in order to electrocute you, and I just don't think there's many enemy mobs that are doing it right now. But if you do encounter one, it's basically like a 0 action speed, similar to chill or freeze. I guess more similar to freeze, where it sets your action speed to 0 and you can't move for a little bit while you are electrocuted. Okay, now let's talk about bleed. Bleed is a weird one. It kind of is confusing. So let's say bleed kind of loops on your life like this. You are only ever inflicted with the bleed ailment if your character is taking damage to their life pool. So if you're able to mitigate damage through block or dodge, your energy shield, or any of those things, bleed will not apply to you. If you do get hit by an attack and it has a chance to inflict bleed, say it's a 50% chance, and then that 50% chance happens to occur, you're inflicted with bleed. Bleed does 15% of the damage that was done to your character's life, so the damage that actually got through and hit you, and it reapplies that 15% every second for 5 seconds. And then if you move, the bleeding damage is doubled, so if you notice that your character is bleeding and you keep running, the amount that you are taking per tick is actually doubled. Also note that this damage is going directly back to your life pool, so say like you have your energy shield come back, or you raise your shield to block, or something like that. This bleed is already ticking against your life, so it will keep dealing damage to your life pool. It hits your life pool directly, similar to like the poison ailment like we talked about a second ago. While here, we should also talk about stun a little bit. My understanding with stun is that it is only calculated on damage that actually ends up being inflicted, so it would actually like branch off here, like post block. And then damage, which is contributing to stun, kind of has an underlying threshold similar to chill, where you have a stun meter that is being filled over time every time your character takes damage. Once that thing is exceeded, your character is stunned. When you're stunned, it kind of like, it interrupts your character's actions. You can't do anything for a couple seconds, you know, and it kind of just slow you down. This can be pretty deadly when you're getting swarmed. But this is a good point to talk about some stuff we can do to mitigate this. So this can actually be a little bit tricky. There's not a lot of ways to increase this ailment threshold, which is dictating when you're shocked, frozen, or ignited. But there are actually jewels which do give plus percentage points to ailment threshold. They are like, you know, like plus 10 to 20%. I'd have to look at the exact numbers, but if you have some wiggle room in the jewels that you're running in your passive tree, this can be a good first step that'll essentially make it so this isn't just your life total. It'll be like your life total plus 50%. So if you only had 100 life, your stun threshold would then be 150. So these kind of calculations that are driving shock, freeze, and fire are then like rolling against a much higher number. The other thing that you can do to deal with a lot of these ailments is actually use charms, and most charms are kind of related to ailments, but I think people often fall into the habit of using a charm that is strictly buffing their resistances on hit. So if you look at a lot of charms in game, how they work is they're, you know, like increase chaos resistance on hit. This is all well and good, but hits, again, like we said at the beginning of the video, only occur when your character's actually hit with something. So like a dot or an AoE you walk into isn't technically hitting you, so it won't trigger a charm. Instead, there are charms that will fire basically like whenever your character gets frozen or shocked or poisoned, that apply as soon as that thing occurs. Those can be a great way, like say you're just dealing with a lot of freeze. I think freeze is one that's getting a lot of people. Poison damage can also be pretty, you know, deadly. There are charms that like are directly tuned to deal with those things, and there's some of the only tools that you really have to deal with some of this stuff, because like, you know, while this damage can be mitigated by resistance, it's still chaos damage that's getting through to you. In the case of poison or like freeze, there's just not that much you can do to avoid your character occasionally getting frozen, other than bumping up your ailment threshold. Finally, let's say you're just running a build that's very low life. You're dependent on energy shield, block, or evade, but you're dying to ailments a lot. It might be worth just considering tuning some of your gear to be a little bit skewed more towards life, just for the sake of bumping up your ailment threshold, because again, your ailment threshold is based on your life total. So if you can increase that, you'll be a little bit more resilient against getting like frozen, shocked, and ignite, those kinds of effects. But those are kind of the ways I see to mitigate ailments. If I've missed anything, please leave a comment. I'll pin a comment with like, you know, updated stuff. If anybody's found anything that I've missed in this video, I'll be sure to update that. Otherwise, if you just found this useful, please leave a comment. Please consider subscribing. I like to do these kind of pseudo deep dives into topics. We'll have some other PoE stuff coming up soon. But thank you for watching. Take it easy. Have a good one.